I think it's been a very good thing that we funded the World War I walks through the Powys War Memorial Project. They'll be very good for local residents to remember what happened and remember those who gave their lives during the war, and also for our tourists and for everybody to appreciate that there were many, many people from rural areas who gave their lives during the war.
The walks that have been set up around the county are excellent. It's helping people to learn about the history, and it's helping to bring to life to the young people of the county the realisation of what people went through.
The walks are so important to people visiting the area, to look at the beauty of the countryside and to see it's just a great place to live, and why wouldn't you want to live in an area like this? And I just think if you come here once, you'll want to certainly come again as a visitor or even to live here.
I suppose I'm biased because I've chosen to live in this part of the world, but I think it's a fantastic place to come and visit. You've got some of the most incredible countryside on your doorstep. It's still very much living countryside.
We have the Royal Welsh Show, which is the largest show of its kind in Europe, the Hay Festival of Literature, the Green Man Festival of Music, and we also have the Machynlleth Comedy Festival.
You've got outdoor activities, an extraordinary spectrum to choose from. And the towns are beautiful living places, and I think that you feel that when you come through.
Mae'n bwysig cofio bod pob pentre yn Powys wedi colli rhywun. Dwi ddim yn gwybod bod un pentre wedi bod heb aberth.
All of these memorials contain individual stories. They're all about real people.
Dych chi'n gallu edrych ar y strydoedd ac edrych ar y tai lle roedd y pobl yma'n byw. Pob stryd yn pob pentref a pob tref wedi colli rhywun yn y rhyfel byd mawr. Felly roedd yr aberth yma yn twtsiad bywydau pawb.
It affected the communities greatly, with the huge numbers of loss of life, and also the men that were farming the land had to go off to war, and we had a huge amount of ladies that had to replace them and work the land in their place.
The most awful things about war and conflict is that it becomes this anonymising force. You know, we see names and numbers, but we don't really get to learn the humanity behind those names and numbers. So I love the idea of engaging that act of memory in the physical act of walking.
This war memorial in particular is incredibly special to me because I have two names of my mother's side of the family. Out of the three sons, two were killed in the First War. And myself, I served as a Welsh Guardsman. And on the other side of my family is a Legg Burke, Nigel Legg Burke, my great-grandfather, was also killed just after my grandfather was born. And so when I see these sites of memorials, wherever they are in the country, there's always just stop and just take it in. Take that serious moment just to remember.
There are quite a few Crickhowell people there that I know or knew of, and the relations are still here in Crickhowell now. Crickhowell is only a small town of 2,000 people, and so many people to lose their lives in the First World War is quite astonishing, really. It's quite sentimental standing here looking at all these names.
With these small communities, it must have had a devastating effect. Imagine losing that amount of people, 67 people, in such a small community over such a small period of time. It's terrifying, terrifying.
People that do this Crickhowell walk will realise how important the people who gave their lives in the First World War are for Crickhowell.
I think it's very important for the town to have this World War I walk established. This is one of the locations of the walk, and one of the original licensees, William Jones, best known as Billy the Corn, was actually injured in World War I and died of his wounds much later, and that was tragic because he actually survived many years, probably in agony.
There's a wonderful picture of my great-grandfather at the outbreak of war standing right here, talking to the throngs, the masses of Crickhowell, trying to get them to join the Breconshire militia, which he then went on to command. And this whole place was absolutely packed completely, this photograph of this recruiting drive with recruiting sergeants ready to sign up people here right next door to what was then the old courthouse as well. everybody knew somebody who was killed or wounded. Huge amounts of wounded came back from the war, let alone those that were killed. So without that funding and this memorial walk and the apps and the information and the boards, we forget, because it's all too easy to just get on with your life. Keeping that bit of tradition alive is always very good, particularly here in Crickhowell district, where there have been huge amounts of military for years. We're just up the road from the infantry school, battle school, called a Galton Army Camp. So it has a huge military background, Crickhowell and the districts as well, let alone the training areas, the Black Mountains, which we're in, and the Brecon Beacons. There are many bits of the memorial walk that actually are so vitally important, but aren't necessarily in the centre of Crickhowell. So do take a walk out to Langattock.
So as a local, I think you will find out things that you hadn't known before. Langattock holds a lot of history, and you can walk through the village and see that history as you're walking through. With all the barcodes and finding out the information, there are little anecdotes on there which you might not know. You may even have some connection to those anecdotes. I don't know, every time I see these war memorials it brings up a choking feeling in my throat. It never ceases to sadden me, and you see it everywhere in these churches. It's just sad.
Well, I think it's very good to remember the First World War, so we think this project is great because it's making communities look at their war memorials again and try to think, you know, who were the people behind these names. It's very important. Wel, ges i'n ngeni yn Llanidloes, a mae teulu fy mam yn dod o'r ardal ac dechreuais i ar y prosiect achos mae enw fy hen daid, David Mills, ar y cofeb rhyfel yn y dref. Felly dechreuais i edrych ar ei stori fo a wedyn ar storïau pawb arall ar y rhestr.
The walk grew out of the research that we've done into the people who died during the war in Llanidloes.
We've done so much research now, Nick and myself, over about 8 years, and we really want to share that with people.
We found a lot of information about just everyday happenings in Llanidloes during the course of the Great War period.
There was a whole generation of future community leaders who were really just wiped out, and pretty much on 2 key days, one in Gallipoli and one in Gaza, and they were just lost to the community, so it would have been a huge shock to everybody living here. Mae Llanidloes yn dref arbennig iawn, reit yng nghanol Cymru, ac mae'n hyfryd, fel dych chi'n gallu gweld, ar diwrnod fel heddiw, efo'r haul allan. Mae efo strydoedd hyfryd i gerdded o gwmpas siopau bach, yr afon, yr eglwys fel fan hyn. Felly mae o'n lle, dwi'n meddwl, sydd yn heiddi i bobl dod i weld ac i clywed am ein stori am y Rhyfel Byd Cyntaf hefyd.
The tour starts at the War Memorial, 115 names listed on the memorial, and they, not just from Llanidloes but from the surrounding area as well. But we try and weave the stories of both Llanidloes men and those from outside the town into the walk.
All the places associated with the First World War are also key places in the town. Places like the town hall, the old public rooms, the church here features in it heavily, and those are buildings which are key to just visiting the town generally, but if you follow the trail, you'll learn a whole lot more about them and they'll mean more to visitors. Dyn ni wedi bod yn gweithio, fel o'n i'n deud, am 8 mlynedd ar hyn. So cam nesaf i ni ydy rhoi y llyfr at ei gilydd, a mae'r prosiect yn mynd i helpu ni i wneud hynny. Felly mae'n cam bwysig iawn wedyn all unrhyw un darllen am y dynion.
I think this walk benefits the town in a number of ways. It gives people an opportunity of exploring the history of the town. And of course, the World War I events that took place are part of a continuum, because the history of Welshpool goes back thousands of years.
It's surprising how much you don't know about your own town when you live there. So the more we can encourage people to understand their own local history, the better.
There's one or two stories of people that are quite well known within the town, such as Percy, the Earl's son, and also William Waring, who was awarded the VC. But there's so many other stories within the town that are far less known, and I think it's really nice that the walk focuses people's minds on all those other stories.
The old police station had a little bit of history from World War I. There were 2 German prisoners who escaped from Shrewsbury, making their way to the coast. This was heard about, and so a Welsh Guards officer, actually on leave at the time, went out looking for them and eventually found them exhausted, so they didn't put up a fight and were taken to the old police station where the Montgomeryshire Constabulary looked after them from there. War Memorial in the grounds of St Mary's Church. This was built in 1923 and designed by Sir Aston Webb, who also designed the facade of Buckingham Palace.
Leading up to the centenary of the First World War, I often would notice that a gravestone would mention someone that died in the First World War, and so I started doing some research, and then I came up with the idea of publishing their story on their centenary of their death, having it on display inside the church and also putting it on our website as well to share that story. When it was the centenary of their death, I painted a little slate poppy and I put it on their gravestone, and the more of those that sort of appeared within the churchyard led me to think it'd be really nice to put this together as a trail, so I developed the Poppy Trail.
The walk around Welshpool is absolutely marvellous. I've learnt a lot from it myself, even though I've lived here for some significant time.
It is a living history, and it's an opportunity to learn more about it.
One important thing about World War I is that we mustn't forget, and this sort of project, taking you around Welshpool, looking at the various places connected with World War I, will help that memory to live on.
To have such an interesting trail in the town of Brecon and other towns in Powys is a very good idea. It gives us, as a Tourist Information Office, it gives us an extra walk that we can tell people about.
So I'm standing here now in Brecon, obviously a town in the middle of the national park, and so traditionally where people go walking is up there in the hills, and that's what I also think is so interesting about this, is that it is asking people to come into the towns and so to explore the area in a different way and through that prism of World War I.
Well, I'm very pleased that the Powys War Memorial Project has set this walk up. I think it gives locals and visitors alike an opportunity to go around the town and see the relationship of some of these names and places.
I think the amount of information you get for the QR reader on your phone then encourages you to go and look at the website and find out the whole picture.
Brecon is a military town, so it had a big effect. But if we think that there were at least 1,200 men went from here to World War I, our book research found 180 men with significant connections to Brecon who died in World War I. If you think you take 180 men out of a town which would have a population of 5,000 to 6,000 at that time, that is significant.
There's some very iconic objects that I think probably my favourite is a small, a very poignant teddy bear that was found in the trenches in Gallipoli just as the British regiments evacuated.
It does make me feel tremendous sympathy for the men themselves and their families, but it also gives me a feeling of wonderment that local people, no experience at all, went off to war and they fought in all different continents and countries. We think about France, but there was Aden and Egypt and Gallipoli and Africa, and most of them went straight from the farmyard or the shop floor who'd never been abroad before, and they gave their all.
I've learned so much about not only the places and their relevance to Brecon, but also the people themselves. They're no longer just names on a war memorial.
It's a wonderful project, and it's interesting to find out the names, the stories. I've learnt so much in going around today, looking and listening to what's been said, and it's absolutely fascinating.
Mae'n pwysig I gael y wak hwn am y sygynnais. Mae'n gret I tymod, y ardal I ni gael publicity am y tourist, tymod, bydd y tourist yn dod. A cadw, fel ti'n gweud, cadw y manylion a history o'r dre, tymod, a'r pobl o yn y ryfel fawr, tymod.
I think local people should be using this walk not only in memory of those that have passed, but to just be out in the fresh air and enjoy. There's so much out here to see.
Rwy'n credu bod y Powys War Memorials Project yn bwysig iawn am yr ardal, as mae'n tynnu at ei gilydd manylion o'r dynion o'r ardal sydd wedi colli fywyd droson ni yn y ryfel byd gyntaf.
I like that all the memorials are being looked after now, and there's so much stories and history there.
Wel, dechreuas y wak yn y Golsedd Park. O'n i'n disgwyl ar y memorial, cerrig memorial fan'na. Diddorol iawn I gweld enwau ar y wal. A un o dau ni yn nabod un o dau o enwau. A pryd ti'n gweld enwau ar y wal a ti'n nabod pwy yw'n teimlad ti, y connection ti gyda y boys. Achos fel mae amser yn mynd, so ni'n mynd I colli, ni'n colli beth sydd wedi digwydd. Mae'n rhaid I gadw e'n fyw. Mae'n rhaid I gadw beth mae boys bach wedi wneud I gadw e'n
Dwi wedi mwynhau cerdded rownd yn yr ardal achos dwi wedi dysgu rhywbeth hefyd ynglyn â'r enwau sydd ar y coffeb yn Parc yr Orsedd, a dwi wedi darllen lan am rhai o'r bobl sydd cael ei enwi yna, a mae hwnna'n bwysig iawn I ni gofio beth maen nhw wedi wneud drosom ni.
With the QR codes, there's so much history coming up. Things I found out today, which I didn't know. They're very, very good. I really had a pleasant afternoon.
This walk takes you to places that ordinarily you wouldn't go. And those are usually very beautiful places. There's just so much to see and do here. And you can't do better than walking around Talcar.
The walk is a great idea, I think. It's going to relate to the youngsters who probably have no knowledge of what went on, and particularly our youngsters with the football club. It gives them a sense of being within the locality and their heritage and where we come from.
It needs to be part of perhaps our local curriculum with the schools, and then we can keep the memory alive.
The town was greatly affected by the World War I. A large number of young men left the town, went to war. Unfortunately, quite a number never came home. It left a devastating effect upon the town.
I mean, you've only got to look at the brother and sister that died over there and the remaining war graves and the amount of names on our war memorials around the town.
In the rural community, they're possibly more affected because it tore apart the heart of the community.
Well, I knew some of the men who came back, and my father was one of them. This is the original war memorial of Talgaf, of the men who lost their lives.
I think it's important so it's never really forgotten.
People can do it whenever they want and speak about it to their kids and families.
I felt emotional because these boys have been through things that no adult or child should have gone through, and I think it's nice to acknowledge what they've been through.
I just felt so sorry for them when I started thinking what they went through and what I deal with, and I think I've got a tough life sometimes with homework and they're going off to war.
Those people fought for freedom, which we have got, and I'm very proud of it.
Tourists need to do this walk so they can immerse themselves in the history and feel part of our town.
Town is beautiful and it's worth exploring.
I think it's important that we don't forget the past. It's a pleasant walk around the town. It's not too strenuous and people get a lot of pleasure from it.
I think this walk is important for Llandrindod Wells because it brings home what happened in those dark times.
The walks are good to get everybody involved, from the children to the adults, and I think local people would have some members of their family on the war memorials, and I think it's a really excellent thing.
I think it's very important that people remember, obviously, but also learn about the people that gave their lives so that we could be free.
World War I affected this part of the world, Llandrindod Wells especially because it was a spa town.
Tourism was almost non-existent. There was nobody coming in the way of investment. There was nobody coming to stay in the hotels. And of course you've got to remember over the space of a fortnight there was over 4,000 troops in the area. And to be quite honest, that must have been a big change to the town because it wasn't as big as it is now.
Troops were billeted here because the army were paying for the hotels to manage to keep them open, and hospitals as well. Some of the hotels were opened up as hospitals.
It was an ideal area for training purposes. There's about 4,000 troops here of the Royal Army Medical Corps, and they were here through 1915, 1916, taking part in many exercises and preparing for war. I think the losses that were sustained in Llandrindod Wells was quite catastrophic. It also really had a knock-on effect. There were so many young men lost. And with that, the knock-on effect of local businesses. Their families could have been running businesses in the town, whether it be a shop or hotel, and there was nobody left to take over that business when they were gone.
Well, I think the Powys War Memorial project is a marvellous thing, really. And I think it will assist in highlighting the need for remembrance.
Yes, I would recommend this walk for locals and tourists because they will learn so much of things they have no idea about.
I think tourists should do this walk because not only do you gain the information regarding the memorial, but also it shows you Llandrindod Wells, the heritage, the architecture, the pure beauty of a Victorian town.
Roedd yn lyflu I cael gwybodaeth am pethau dydyn ni ddim yn gwybod o blaen. Rwy'n meddwl bod e'n well cael arweinydd ar y cerdded, ond of course gyda'r smartphone mae'n bosib I defnyddio yr IT.
I've lived here for over 30 years and I discovered things today that I hadn't realised were there, things I've walked past. So I think it just gives us a fuller picture of the town and its past and the people who lost their lives defending us.
Yn y prosiect hwn, dwi'n meddwl mae'n dda i'r bobl cael cyfle I gwybod beth digwyddodd yn y rhyfel.
I think that local people would still learn a lot about Newtown through this walk. For example, they wouldn't know where the First War memorial stones are in St David's Church.
It gives them a different aspect than the cenotaph itself, to go around and see what other connections the town had with the war.
We should always remember and commemorate those who fell
in the Great War and in conflicts since.
World War I affected the town very much in different ways. A number of people, men and women, didn't come back from the war. Those who were here, their families, they suffered very much.
World War I actually did alter the history of Newtown and its industry. Newtown was the major textile area of Wales. Price Jones was the largest employer in this area. He employed around 2,000 people in Newtown, and that really was more or less half the population of the time. This walk actually starts at the Cenotaph, and then we go on to the Price Jones building where many of the staff had fallen in the First World War.
Well, as I went around the walk, I think not just did I learn, but I felt very moved by some of the stories that were behind the points of interest. For example, the suffragists' house, whose struggle was going on at the same time as the First World War, or the son from the Lion Hotel, who formed the King's bodyguard and later died in France in 1916. It's the human story behind those points of interest.
So when the men of Newtown were obviously called to the First World War, the women of Newtown had a major role in trying to keep the town alive. The suffragette movement, you can understand why it came about at that particular time, where women felt they had to take the place of a lot of men that were actually at the First World War.
Falle fel wax fel un cael yn anelu at yr ysgolion efo bobl ifanc, I nhw cael cyfle I edrych around, I nhw cael ar hanes y Dre Newydd hefyd.
Highlighting all the different areas throughout the town and the association between those areas and World War I, whilst also selling the town all the green spaces and the fantastic river that we've got in Newtown here. It's good all round.
I live in Talgarth, and every time I walk past that war memorial, there can't be more than 15 or 16 names on it. But one of my favourite writers, David Jones, in his fantastic work about the First World War, in parenthesis, he talks about walking past this body of a man from Talgarth. And every time I look at that memorial, I think he was looking at one of you, one of those names. So I think it really changes your relationship with the more, it's hardly urban, but with the townscapes in the area, which is of course a beautiful area in terms of the countryside. But I think through the prism of World War I, it's a great way to get to know the towns and the villages as well. Memory and walking, and I'd say imagination and thinking, really go hand in hand. And it's so important that we do remember the detail of these conflicts, because I'd argue so many of our present troubles are linked to a failure to properly remember the past, what's been sacrificed, what we've done wrong in the past, so that we don't do it wrong now and in the future.